Howdy, howdy. So, this is Aaron Purdue coming at you live from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And we are, sorry I'm getting a little bit late today afternoon, but we're going to go ahead and head on down and we're going to have this discussion. Okay. So, a discussion of late is declining cities. Now, I happen to be in the northeast heights of Albuquerque, which is actually still a reasonably decent part of town. But even so, it's not what it used to be. Okay. So when we're covering politics and we're covering culture and all this other stuff, and we're covering the decline of cities, we got to look at what we call the Margaret Sanger paradigm. Okay. So there's been a cultural shift. And I know I hate on the boomers a lot. And it's not necessarily hate. Let's just call it what it is. Let's just call it telling the truth. And early on this week, there was a discussion on another show. And it happened to deal with the district attorney in Fulton County, Georgia. And I dialogued with this host about how my city and the city of Atlanta, which was apparently a city that he loved, has declined significantly. Both cities were once relatively decent. Actually, they were awesome cities to live in. Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Atlanta, Georgia, back in the 90s. The early part of the 2000s, the 80s, even the late 70s, right? They were awesome cities to live in. They were vibrant cities. A lot of retired military, a lot of industry in both cities, and not just tech industry, but there was a lot of blue-collar industry as well as tech industry. And they were growing cities, and they weren't red cities, but they weren't blue cities. They were purple. Okay, there was just enough of a conservative influence in both towns to where you still had your, I guess the term now would be your urban woke types. But you also had enough sensible people, enough silent generation and greatest generation people, and enough business people and blue-collared people around to where it would give it a balance. So I remember Albuquerque being portrayed, and Mike Judge, when he did Beavis and Butthead, and actually a lot of his stuff in King of the Hill, even though it's set in Texas, that's based upon his experience. A lot of it's based upon his experiences here as a young man in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Yes, Mike Judge is from here. So when you watch his shows, and you watch the older people in their shows, and their cultural conservative leanings and attitudes and personalities, that's from him experiencing a lot of the people that he experienced here in Albuquerque, and of course somewhat while he was living in Texas too. But yeah, so he captures the cultural dynamic of at least Albuquerque fairly well in his cartoons, amongst the older generations in those cartoons. So I promised you guys that we were going to start at the abortion clinic here in Albuquerque, one of the abortion clinics, the biggest one, which is the Planned Parenthood over on San Mateo. But I had lunch over on the north side of town, and I'm actually close to a place I wanted to discuss later on in the video. So we're gonna kind of Quentin Tarantino this. And we're going to go around various parts of the city. So we're not going to be exactly walking the streets, we're going to be driving the streets. And we're going to be discussing what it was and what it is, okay? So coming up here on my right is the Montgomery Towers, okay? They're not tall towers, but 6-story apartment complex. These have been around since the 1960s, and they were, at one point, considered luxury apartments. Let me go ahead and get a drink here. I'm going to put you up. Okay. And in the 80s and 90s, it was mostly populated by middle-aged and older people. I shouldn't say lower middle income, but middle income families. Maybe not super large families, but they were pretty nice. You could tell the classic 1960s concrete and brick construction. It's winter time now, but there still is some. It used to be really nice and landscaped, lots of trees and stuff. Real pretty place back then. Now, it's primarily populated with Section 8. Okay? I don't want to go that way. I want to go left. It's primarily populated with Section 8 people. And it's really run down. A lot of illegal immigrants living there too. And that's going to lead into another report that I plan on doing in the future that I've already kind of leaked about. Going forward, when we are actually going to go down to El Paso in Las Cruces and take a look down there, because that metropolitan area actually does sit on the border. But this is a pretty woke city, and a lot of parts of this town that were very nice, middle income, just kind of Mayberry parts of the city, I guess you could call them, back in the 80s and 90s now are completely different, okay? So we're going to make a left, or make a right up here, go left, and we're going to go down into an old neighborhood that I actually used to do some work in for a property manager, or a property owner, when I was here in high school. And that's off of McCarthy Street, Douglas MacArthur Street, MacArthur Street. Again, a neighborhood that was built in the 60s. Brick ranchers, they had some units back in here that had a brick rancher and then attached were 2 apartment homes as well. So the landlord would live in the house, the primary house, and he'd have 2 tenants with them. But, they were kind of nicely set up, very middle income. When I was living there, when I was working there for this property owner, it was a very nice neighborhood. Very green, leafy lawns, very well upkept. Predominantly middle-aged and older people that were living there. And now, as we go into this neighborhood, you're going to see what types of people live there. Now, before we go in this neighborhood, there's actually a mega church. It takes up a whole corner of a strip mall. But it's a wannabe Joel Osteen church that's parked there. And I had the opportunity of going there last week because a friend invited me, and they didn't even show up. And not one time did we crack open the Bible in that whole preaching session. Boy, I'm having a lot of trouble making my words today. Not one time did we open the book and actually read during the whole experience. He quoted a couple scriptures here and there, and he gave a pseudo invitation in the end. But not one time was the actual gospel shared about, you need to believe in Jesus or you'll go to hell. And it's just kind of fitting that this church is in this area now, given what this neighborhood has turned into. So we're going to turn up here as soon as traffic clears. Here we go. Little Cece's Pizza there. Come across a Baptist church. What do you say about that? Huh? Baptist? Because there ain't no Baptist and there ain't no Pentecostal churches no more. They're all about the same. At least in my eyes. Now remember, Fannie Willis got up and preached in one of these churches in Atlanta. A Baptist church. Right? I'll show you here in a minute. Now the inside of this church is pretty nice. They got like a little coffee shop there and whatnot. And I remember coming up in church. My grandpa was kind of a country preacher. They had a coffee machine and somebody brought donuts. Or actually, they was in a real small town, so they didn't have a donut shop. But somebody brought, maybe some homemade baked goods and whatnot, and maybe we had a little dinner after supper, or a little supper after church. But it was, old-fashioned. But look at here. Oh. That's... Yeah. Imagine what goes on in there. Nothing too ratchet, but there ain't much gospel preached there. At least not when I was there. Not much Bible reading. So I'm gonna find my way down to this neighborhood. If I get back in here. And they block that street off. I gotta come back out and go around. It's alright, we'll get there. We shall get there. Make a left here at the light and go back up on Washington Street. This is Monroe and Montgomery. Mountains sure look pretty with all the fresh snow on them. So, a lot of what's gone on has gone on during the tenure of the primacy of the boomer generation. A lot of it was set in place as they were up and coming young adults. Now remember, I rant and raved about 2 weeks ago about how the civil rights movement and a lot of the pro-freedom type stuff that happened in the later part of the mid-20th century was directly attributed to the silent generation and the World War II generation, and kind of an outgrowth of what those two generations experienced either at war overseas or in the wartime economy here at home. Okay? And the fact that a lot of social barriers were proven to be incorrect And that those two generations got to witness it and carried the civil rights movement really most of the way forward until the boomers came in and got involved in a lot of grievance politics. And in essence, they've kind of really pushed things backwards now. Because now we're talking about, in the name of pro-black people or pro-Hispanic people or pro-this or pro-that, separating college dorms. And actually it's on the left here. Go around the block so you can get a better view of it. Separating graduations and stuff like that. Well, that's what the World War II and silent generation fought to end, right? And now we're coming to the end of the boomer generation. Gen X had a little bit of a day, but not much. And we're coming into the millennials because demographically, they're kind of bookends on a smaller generation. Even though millennials are pretty much, for the most part, the younger brothers and sisters of the Gen Xers. Well, a lot of them are. Because some Gen Xers are the younger brothers and sisters of the younger boomers. But, so, and the millennials think a lot like the boomers do, and in some effects, they even think worse. Like boomer mentality on steroids, right? Okay, Douglas MacArthur Street. Let me show you these houses here. Okay. Still okay neighborhood, but not near as nice as it used to be. And you can tell, late 50s, early 60s architecture. And this would have been the suburbs at the time, as the city's grown. But, it's not too bad. Until now we're starting to see stuff a little bit run down here, right? Just not in the best of repair. Like I said, in the 90s, in the 80s, I used to work on these properties. Paint's falling off, so you just kind of, you could tell at one time they were really nice places. See that? Now these are the units that I was telling you about, where you got the house sitting in the back. And then you got the two apartments there. We're coming down to the one that I used to work on for this guy when I was in high school. Across here, see that? That's sad. This one right here. Elm tree in the back, or in the front yard's just gone all to hell. That space in there used to have grass in it. This one's not too bad, but actually no, this ain't one. This is another one. It's a little further down here. It's been 30 years since I've been here, y'all, so give me a little bit of grace on this. Okay, this is the one I worked on. See that? That was a really nice place. I used to keep that lawn, have somebody parked up on there. He had all kinds of nice landscaping in here. It's all covered in weeds, falling apart. This used to be a really like coming in here and working. Guy paid me pretty well to do it too. But. So, just, within 30 years, this nice little what used to be a Charlie Brown neighborhood And there's still some nice places in here. Probably some of the older people are still back in here and still kind of keep things up. But yeah, this is a lot worse than, it's gone downhill quite a ways. Okay. So let's talk about the boomer generation as we go to our next destination, right? Boomer generation started becoming adults in the early 60s. This is why they like to talk so much about things like Martin Luther King, John F. Kennedy, stuff like that. Not that they had any participation in those things, because they were still either teenagers or young adults, so they were too young to really have any effect in those things, but they're old enough to remember those things. And then we start getting into the mid-60s and the 70s when they were actually young adults and actually starting to move into the workforce and move into participating in society at large, right? And that's when we started to see the culture shift dramatically to the left. Now, I mentioned to you before about the lost generation, and the lost generation was kind of a split generation. It was either really, 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 really conservative, which a majority of them were. But in academia, the lost generation was very leftist. Those were the ones that were, playing around with the communists in the 30s, part of the 40s. Those were the ones that Senator McCarthy was trying to weed out of business, politics, and the entertainment industry back in the 50s. Which McCarthy was right. He didn't exactly go about it in a constitutional way. But he's right. Or he was right. He was dead right. And now, 50, 60, 70 years later, it's coming out that what he was going after actually did exist in the places that he thought it existed, right? So, man, that place looks rough. Man, these used to be nice little houses. Anyways, so that's when we started getting stuff like affirmative action. Okay, well, Aaron, affirmative action is a good thing because it gave minorities a preference because they were supposedly behind the power curve. Okay, all right, yes, I get it. I can understand the logic behind that. But that's not what the civil rights leaders wanted. You go back and you listen to Malcolm X, you listen to Dr. King, you listen to other civil rights leaders of the time, and one mantra that they keep, at least the most prominent or the most power or the most effective ones, I should say. One of the mantras they kept repeating was equal opportunity, equal protection under the law. Okay? That they wanted everybody on the same playing field. They didn't want preferential treatment at all. They just wanted equal treatment. They knew that they were behind the power curve. But they also knew that the best way to catch up was just to be put on the same playing field as everybody else and have the same opportunities to succeed and fail and learn as everybody else. None of them wanted preferential treatment. Not a one. So we had academia of the lost generation and the racists of the lost generation. So academia being the pro-communists, the racists just being who they are. Teaching the boomers in school and primarily in the colleges and affecting political decisions. So a lot of the people who were locked in to Jim Crow in the 40s and 50s, even though Jim Crow's been around since Woodrow Wilson, and in some states before that even. But it really became a big thing during Woodrow Wilson. It became an official thing. And once again, at the state levels, it probably been going on for about 20, 30 years before that. A lot of those people that were locked into that were from that era. So they were trying to inform the culture. Those would be your Lyndon B. Johnsons. And then you had your academia, right? And your academia, they pretend, or the communists, which function a lot in academia, the pseudo-intellectuals, as Thomas Sowell likes to call them, they like to do the old bait and switch. Most of them are racists. Most of them hate black people. Most of them hate Jewish people. Most of them hate Hispanic people. Most of them hate Native Americans. They can't stand you. They cannot. They don't want those groups of people on the face of this planet. Period. Okay? Now, they tried to do it by force. They tried to do it by enslavement. They tried to do it by forceful genocide. They tried to do it by Jim Crow. And, oh yeah, black people, y'all were the most prominent in Jim Crow. But a version of Jim Crow was used, and in some cases is still being used, against Native Americans. Ergo, the reservation system. If you don't believe me, go check that out and see what their property rights are on the reservation. They have none. Okay? They get to live there, but they have no actual private property rights. And they pay to live there too, by the way. They don't live there for free. They get government benefits. But welfare in the 1960s was changed from a safety net to a dependency system. On purpose. Okay. So what these racists, both the communists and we'll call them the eugenicists, even though a Southern Dixiecrat in the 1950s who wore a cape swore against communism. He was more of a fascist, but he swore against communism, but they were actually two sides of the same coin. Okay. Now, in the Middle East, there's a saying that says that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So these people, like the Lyndon B. Johnsons and the communists, even though they swear they don't like each other, when it comes to being racists, they help each other. Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. What's the one thing it did? Well, yeah, it turned the welfare state into a dependency state, that's for sure. But how did it do that? Y'all bother to go back and read about that? It removed men from the families. Okay? So how this would work is, let's say, let's not even use black people. Let's say poor white people, because they didn't like poor white people either, right? So we got a poor white woman. She's in West Virginia, in Appalachia. Not very well educated. Neither is her boyfriend or her husband. They have a few kids. He's either underemployed, meaning that he's not able to make enough money to sustain them, or because of the nature of the economy in that region of the country, he's unemployed, or he's doing part-time work or whatever, and they need assistance. Well, in the War on Poverty, what they did was they said, okay, well, you can have the assistance, but he's got to go. And even if he's not working, he's still a possible male adult that could possibly work. So therefore, in order for us to justify you having benefits, we got to make sure that you're that you're a mom, single mom, who is with your children, and because of that, all of your efforts need to go into raising your children because your husband or your boyfriend's not there, and therefore that's what we'll use to justify you getting benefits. Families used to be able to get on welfare if they were down and out. It was a temporary thing, and they usually only kept it a temporary thing within the family because they would strive to find work. It was considered a point of shame to be on benefits, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, until this war on poverty thing came in. And then it became an incentive system to keep people dependent and to keep the stronger person. See, these sociologists that help formulate this stuff, they knew what they were doing, okay? As soon as you remove the man from the home, you can make these women dependent. So you break the family. All right? Now, what happens when a man loses his family and his purpose? What's he more likely to do? What happens when a son is not raised around his father? Or his primary male role model? See, they knew this stuff going in. Johnson knew this stuff going in. Well, Johnson he wasn't a racist. Okay. So how come up until the time he was Kennedy's vice president, he fought every single civil rights bill that came through Congress from the time he got elected to Congress in 1948 until he became Vice President Johnson in 1961? How come? Well, he signed the civil rights legislation. That was a bait and switch. He wanted you to think that he was on your team, so that way he could get you primed for the next thing. He even said it. He said when he signed the Civil Rights Bill in 1964, I'll have these niggas, the word with the R at the end, voting Democrat for 200 years. And then he turns around and he goes after the not white races, black people, Hispanic people, and poor white people in this country by making the welfare system of these disadvantaged people dependent upon the fact that they had to remove the male householder from the home. And then incentivize these people that they would actually make more money the more kids they had, but without a man in the house. Be truthfully honest with you. Even though a lot of these welfare queens live in the ghetto, okay, if you were to take and sit down and put a dollar value to their benefits, what they earn off of them every year, versus just a Jane and Joe middle class family, they're actually making more. That Papa can't be in the house. Why, oh why, oh why is this going on? Why is this going on? Lost generation were the teachers of the boomers. Johnson wasn't World War II generation. He did serve in World War II, kind of, but he was actually from the generation before. He's a little bit older than them guys. So, what's really going on here? One of Johnson's elder peers was Margaret Sanger. Okay, and we're actually getting close to this place. So we'll go down one more light. I'm going to zip down here to San Mateo again. But yeah, one of the older peers in his generation was Margaret Sanger. She had she had a number of projects. But one of her projects was the Negro Project. And in some letters that she wrote, some of her friends regarding the Negro Project, she told on herself. She told on a lot of people in her generation that had her mindset, okay? And in the generation before her. She wrote in some letters in 1939 about how she was setting up her birth control measures, and she'd been doing all this birth control nonsense since 1916. So actually, she's the generation before him, but she was a peer because his generation was kind of, a lot of people in his generation actually dabbled in this stuff too. But she writes about how using birth control to control the populations and eventually exterminate the populations of who she called human weeds, undesirables, unfit, genetically unfit people. This is the same stuff as what was going on with the Scopes trial. Okay? This is why they wanted us to believe that God didn't create us, that we came from apes. There's a reason for this, okay? There's a reason why they wanted to take us away from the good book, or from the Quran, if you're Muslim, or from the Torah and the Talmud, if you're Jewish, right? Or the Tanakh, excuse me. If you're Jewish, right? They wanted to take us away from the books and from the traditions and from what we know is right. And from what real science, not junk science, real science tells us is true, okay? The whole notion of people coming from apes. Well, if we could talk about people coming from apes, then we could go into, okay, well, these people are more evolved than these people, and these people that say white people are more evolved than Native Americans, or Native Americans are less evolved than black people, or whatever, right? They could now they gave themselves mental license to do all these mental gymnastics. And that actually came from Darwin. Darwin, he was an elitist. He was back in the 1850s. But yeah, that was the whole, that's part of that whole progressive stuff, right? And Darwin is actually where a lot of people in the South, actually in the antebellum period and immediately after the Civil War, were drawing their justification for their attitudes. So Margaret Sanger, with the Negro Project and with other projects that she had, she opened her first birth control clinic. Okay, it's gone. it's gone. She opened her first birth control clinic in 1916. And of course, they shut her down. But anyways, the whole notion was, she eventually founded Planned Parenthood in the 1920s. And out of this came like the Negro Project and other projects like that. And her whole notion is that she wanted these people to stop breeding. She wanted them to die off, okay? That was one of her notions, okay? That's why she created Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood being the #1 provider of baby deletions in this country. Also in Mexico and Canada too. They're in those two countries as well. But I'm actually here where the clinic used to be. And maybe some of y'all have been watching my videos. Maybe they saw some of the stuff I put up last month and decided to move or to close down. Maybe it has nothing to do with me at all. Maybe somebody else was having the same discussions and moving in certain areas. And maybe they decided it was time for them to move, because I'm going to show you why here in just a minute. We're going to take the same field trip we did about 5 weeks ago. Okay? Same exact field trip. Here we go. Let's take a look. That sign used to say Planned Parenthood. It's now blank. Ain't that beautiful? But that clinic was very strategically placed. Get back up here. And the neighborhood on either side, this neighborhood just to my left, which would be on the west side of the street. This is San Mateo and Marquette. Is a lower middle class neighborhood. Used to also be a real nice neighborhood back in the 90s. It's a lower class neighborhood now. Lower middle class neighborhood, but it's not terrible. Oh, yeah, on the west side of the street, it's still not too terrible, but the east side of the street, it's not too terrible, but it's a little bit worse, okay, because we're getting close to an area of town we call the war zone, okay? This clinic is very strategically placed. Now, last time I did this on a Sunday, so there wasn't a whole lot of traffic here. I'm going to wait for traffic to clear, and then we're going to count from where this clinic used to be how many stoplights I go through, and it is less than a mile, to one of the worst ghettos in the city of Albuquerque, New Mexico. So we turned on to San Mateo, getting in the left lane, because we're going to make a left here real soon. Here's the Copper stoplight coming up. Copper Avenue. One stoplight. We're going to stop at Central Avenue. So this will, of course, eat a little bit of time, but it's not far for somebody to walk. So this is the second stoplight right here. Central Avenue. has always been, this at one time wasn't a super nice part of town. And this area of town has always been known as a war zone. But in the last 30 years, it's gotten way worse. This building here on my left is actually an abandoned skyscraper. It's about 300 foot tall. And used to have the big green First National Bank sign on it. It's been removed now. But you used to be able to see this from all the way across town. And it used to be a full building. Built in the 60s, so it's been abandoned for a few years now. That and the one behind it. The one behind it was actually where Microsoft got started. And then, of course, they moved to Washington State later on. So that was Central. This is Highland. And this turns left into a shopping center, so we'll call that 2.5. This is Zuni Avenue right here. We'll call this 3 traffic lights, okay? And then we're going to make a left on Zuni. Then we're going to make a quick right into the projects, the ghetto. So it's 3 traffic lights from where that clinic was, okay? There's a reason why that clinic is there. Remember what I told you about Margaret Sanger? Not but a few minutes ago. All right? Oh, she was also one of the people responsible for the Tuskegee experiment. Yes, she was. She was also a supporter of forced lobotomies, forced sterilization. Well, guess what types or what demographics of people? Yes, the mentally handicapped, of course, that was always what she threw in there, but Jewish people, black people, Native American people, Hispanic people, Catholics, and poor white people. So she wanted to kill off their babies. She wanted to prevent them from reproducing, either by birth control, which in her mind was baby deletion, forced sterilization without consent. She wanted to experiment on these people to find more effective ways of spreading disease to them and killing them. The Tuskegee experiment. And we just made a quick right turn. The projects. Here we are, folks. Just a little space. From where they, up until a few weeks ago, had the baby deletion clinic. Ain't that weird? And if she couldn't delete these people, Lyndon B. Johnson was going to help her out by making sure that these folks just stayed poor. Go ahead, Jehovah's Witnesses. Go across the street. Go ahead, spread your lies. This is one of the deadliest neighborhoods in the United States. Now, the city of Albuquerque has officially renamed this the International District. Why'd they do that? Well, this neighborhood is primarily black people, Hispanic people, some Vietnamese boat people, a lot of Cubans, a lot of immigrants. just a lot of poor white people. Now, back in the 50s and 60s, this was a fairly young neighborhood. There's an Air Force base not too far from here. So some of this is military ghetto too, but most of the military guys are prohibited from even coming into this neighborhood. And there's some nicer patches in here, but most of this is pretty rough. But this is actually even worse now than it was when I was a kid. And it was pretty rough back then. Most of these houses now have been subletted out into, 2 or 3 apartment units, or where you share a common kitchen. Let's go down Trumbull. This is a notorious street. Where you share a kitchen with. So it's not like a college ghetto, because that's things that happen in college ghettos too. But yeah, what they call them, flop houses. This is rough in here, man. Some of it's a little better than it was, but I think we're getting away from some of it now. But starting to get into a little bit better neighborhood. It's starting to clean stuff up. As you go a little bit further east, but boy, some of this stuff is rough back in here. This is Florida, Georgia. I think we're on the state streets now. So, still lower income here, but that's the thing about Atlanta too. Now we're getting back into tenements down this road. Atlanta has Fort McPherson out there, or had it. It's closed now, but now we're getting out here towards Trumbull Park. This is the worst part, out back in here. But Atlanta had Fort McPherson and stuff like that, and once they closed it up, I don't know what went out there now, but and then of course Augusta, Georgia was 2 hours away, and they had Fort Gordon out there, so there was a lot of troops in town. And back in the 90s, there was a lot of up-and-coming business in Atlanta. And Atlanta was a beautiful city. It had its rough areas. Every big city does. But back in the 90s, they called Atlanta Hotlanta. And I went to Atlanta a number of times. Used to be, back then, you could go on the south side, or not south side, downtown, on a Friday or Saturday night, and it was a nice place to hang out. The big popular place was the Underground, but boy, there was a lot of places you could go, like these little jazz clubs or whatnot, sit down and have a drink, maybe meet a nice lady. It was kind of chill. There was R&B clubs, there was hip-hop clubs. There was just a lot of nice stuff to do. And, of course, they had Freaknik, but we won't talk about that. But, that's kind of like going up to Zozobra up in Santa Fe. But, it's so sad. It used to be wonderful, too. See, they got the fan out here. They got those are to make sure that you don't run away when they're chasing you. This is Trumbull Park back in here. Now remember, Central is 5 blocks to my south. We're still less than 2 miles from that clinic, or where that clinic used to be. Look at this. Got one of these stupid... Man, I hate these things too. I used to hate these things when I delivered furniture because it was hard to get the truck around them. A few brownstones there. Look at this. The war zone. It's up here where all these homeless people are. This is Trumbull Park. Look at this. That's enough right there. So that's one ghetto. We're going to go down Route 66, Central Avenue. Now, from the base of the mountains where you come out of the canyon and drop into the city, and there's suburbs out in the mountains. There's Carnoel, Cedar Crest, Tijeras, Moriarty, Edgewood, Sandia Park. Now, people who like to live up in the hills and back in the woods have a view, and you know, those are still real nice areas. Well, some of them are. But from the base of the mountains, from Tramway Boulevard, Highway 556, which kind of forms a loop around the northeast side of town, down Central Avenue. I mean, there was a couple rough areas, obviously, but there used to be like a lot of, hotels and other places. Look at here. Y'all can love this. Look at this. Yep, that's what that is. What did that one guy used to say? Let's bring Chicago to the front of the congregation. Let's bring Detroit. I don't know, let's bring Albuquerque to the front of the congregation. That's my lunchbox from work. Yes, my truck's dirty, I'm so sorry. But at least I got a truck. Used to come down Central Avenue, and it was kind of Route 66, and yeah, you had the homeless people and stuff like that. But, you had small businesses on either side, and yes, there were some no-tail motels, but, some of it was low class, some of it was not, but it had a bottom, okay? And at least the damn street lights worked. I'll show you that here in a minute. Okay? At least the fucking streetlights worked. Alright, let's make a left turn here. Get down here a little ways here. Boy, it's just awful down here. But if you got $40 and you're real lonely, actually, we're going to take a little bit of a detour. I want to show you something. Well, no, we'll not go there. Okay, yeah, now we're coming up on the section where the fucking streetlights are just, some of them are just fucking missing. At night, you drive down Central Avenue back in the 80s and 90s, and like I said, you know, this was always kind of a rough part of town, but at least it had a bottom. At least the streetlights worked. Now the city's even given up on doing that. I'll show you here in a minute. They don't even maintain the fucking streetlights. And what's funny is Route 66, Central Avenue was supposed to be, you know, the section of Route 66 that passed through Albuquerque, so it's supposed to be a scenic route, right? And they kind of like put up little fancy street lights and stuff like that back in the day, in order to kind of celebrate this, kind of make it look more rustic, right? What's this? And of course that was the 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. Watch the street lights as we go under. That one's missing. And I believe this whole section between San Mateo and Louisiana, you drive down it at night, and almost all of these, like you can see, they're either missing or they're just completely out. Some of the freeways are like that too. Look at that, whole bunch of them missing right here. See, they don't have the bulbs on them, or the little things on them with the bulbs in them. Fucking completely busted. And they've been that way for a few years now. They don't bother to come out. That's not the Albuquerque I grew up in the 80s and 90s. We have a deal right now, and it's actually made national news, where there's some attorneys here in town that are paying police officers not to show up in court for DWI arrests. And now, they started out with saying that they had to throw out 151 cases. But I think the number is even higher than that. And the police chief, Hector Mendoza, talks like he's a vato from the West Side Crips. For all I know, he probably is. He's still in office. He's still sitting there. And if it wasn't sad, it would be comical to watch him during his press conferences, trying to explain this away, trying to say that he's going to figure out a system to where they can deal with this and hold people accountable. Apparently, this has been going on for a number of years. Look at this. I'll show you this. Completely empty. 2 skyscrapers completely empty. When I was growing up here in this town, both of those buildings were full. And the taller one had a big sign on it you could see all the way across the city from 20 miles away. And this isn't even uptown, it's just, a street corner. And there's a bunch of them further back towards uptown. They've got tenants in them, but you drive past them at night, and where, 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago, in the early 2000s, the 80s, and the 90s, you drive past them at night, and most of the windows would be lit up. Let me show you something even sadder. And this just happened about a year and a half ago. The crime in this part of town is so bad, and Albuquerque police just could not or would not deal with it. And of course, they can't keep officers in the police force here because they like to deal with everybody with kid gloves. Walmart Supercenter, off of just behind San Mateo and Central, where that major intersection is. That closed March of last year. And remember, we're still real close to that clinic where Margaret Sanger wanted to kill these people. Yeah, I said that right. I meant what I said. And this is the outcome of the system that Lyndon B. Johnson brought about in 1965 with his war on poverty. And now we're at the end of the baby boomer generation with their progressive politics that even made that worse. It's an American city today. That's a major American city. Albuquerque is one of the largest cities in the United States. It's in the top 50. I think it's either in the high 20s or low 30s, but it is one of the largest cities. So this is a major American city. Atlanta's right behind it. It's somewhere close on that list. Either right below it or right behind it. Or right in front of it or right behind it. And the same shit's going on there. Well, why are you talking about Albuquerque and Atlanta? Because that's what we talked about earlier this week. But you can apply this to Baltimore. You can apply this to San Francisco. Oh, dear God, you can apply this to San Francisco. Chicago. St. Louis. Kansas City. Memphis. Knoxville. New Orleans. New York City. Hangerman, you're in New York City today, or you were yesterday. Remember what I said about empty streets downtown here in Albuquerque? Well, Mr. Todd Sachs, who has a real estate show, is also in New York City this week. And he did a broadcast from Times Square, right below where you were staying. And he said he was in a realtors conference. And he was telling us that compared to when he was at that same conference 5 years ago, the place is practically dead. Bet you're seeing the same thing. Albuquerque was a wonderful city. And there's still parts of it that are very beautiful. And you can see where, like, the vestiges of when it was. You know what I mean? And you could go to Atlanta and see that too. You could go to parts of New York City and see that. Detroit, fucking forget that. But this place ain't far behind Detroit. And we're going to show you why here in a bit. Okay? Now, in my comments to Angerman earlier this week, I made a comment about when certain industries came into these cities. And once again, we were talking specifically about Albuquerque and Atlanta because it seems both cities are kind of on the same track right now. But, yeah. So, when I was growing up in Albuquerque, and some of these businesses were closed earlier than others. Some of them actually were closed early in the 80s. Others were closed in the 2000s. But when I was a little boy here, Albuquerque had the largest sawmill in the western United States. It's called Duke City Lumber. It's just northwest of downtown, off of a rail spur. And they process timber from Arizona, New Mexico, southern Colorado, southeastern Utah. And there is a lot of mountains and a lot of pine and fir and cedar out here, a bunch of it. Spruce, because we are in the Southern Rockies. There's a lot of that shit out in Arizona too. And yeah, they processed a lot of that timber. Well, that closed down, I want to say, in the late 80s. General Electric, up until 2001, had their largest jet engine plant out here. It's out by the airport. That's now, their old factory's now occupied by a movie studio. There are still a few steel mills here. Not as many as there were. There were a lot of smaller sawmills here. The rail yard here was still a functioning rail yard. There's still a railhead here, but it's not near what it used to be. And you go down to the warehouse district, just east of downtown, and up and down the railroad. Back when I was a kid, there was businesses all over the place in there. Factories, shops, lumber yards, steel yards. There's still one big food manufacturer here, Bueno Foods, and actually Rosie's. But they used to process a lot of food here too. A lot of that stuff is gone. We still have the big Intel plant up in Rio Rancho, which is a suburb northwest of the city. And they just finished building out some stuff up there, so it looks like they're going to be hiring people. But even up there for about 20 years, that plant was almost closed. And just like Atlanta, and actually there was a paper mill out here west of here too, but that's gone. There's only one paper mill left in the state of New Mexico, and that's out at Pruitt, which is out of Grants. There was a manufacturer out here. It was actually owned by the Laguna tribe, and it was west of the city, but it employed a lot of people, called Laguna Industries, and they used to make all the communication shelters and the office shelters and the portable, like the ambulance shelters and the portable medical shelters that would go on the backs of trucks, like the 2.5-ton trucks and the Humvees for the United States military. That plant is closed. Been closed since about, I want to say 2006. Atlanta used to have a lot of paper mills. They used to have a lot of sawmills. Matter of fact, in one of Tyler Perry's earlier Medea movies, Diary of a Mad Black Woman, the man she eventually falls in love with, this movie was made in the 2000s, worked at a sawmill. How many of them sawmills are still around Atlanta? How many of them good paying blue-collar jobs are still there? Because a lot of them are gone here in Albuquerque. There's still some left. Hell, I work at one of them. I'm a truck driver. And I haul construction materials. But those were the foundations of these major cities, or they were. What built Detroit? What built Chicago? What built Pittsburgh? What built Memphis? What built St. Louis? What built New York City, for God's sake? What was the base of those economies? All the way back into the late 1800s. Okay? This town is just as old as a lot of the cities on the East Coast. Matter of fact, it's older than most of them. And it's always been a way station for a lot of industry here. Mentioned that in a past discussion. So we're coming up on downtown now. Okay. In this downtown area, now mind you, it's a Saturday afternoon. In this downtown area, up until about, well, the pandemic really damaged it really bad. It was kind of like the nail in the coffin. But up until about 10, 15 years ago, this place was jumping. Now, a lot of it's been gentrified, so there's a lot of loft apartments in here and stuff like that, but Saturday afternoon downtown, one of the largest cities in the United States. And look how empty these streets are. Look at this. It's pathetic. We're going to make a left turn on Central Avenue here, the next block. And it's the oldest part of downtown where you would normally find like the old restaurants and the theaters and stuff like that. There's a little bit of traffic here. There's some stuff going on here today, but not a whole lot. Used to be you would have to wait for traffic. And it would take you about 20 to 30 minutes to get all the way across downtown on the street. We're going to zip cross it probably about 5. Now these buildings are sitting empty. Used to come down here as a kid. And you can still get places. I mean, there's like some coffee shops and stuff here. But you used to be able to like go down 4th Street out to Civic Plaza. They used to have festivals here all the time, and they still have a few in the summer, but not near like it used to be. That restaurant there has been there since the 20s. They're getting ready to close. But all of these streets at one point in time were nothing but wall-to-wall traffic and people. Especially Central Avenue with all of what used to be like the shops and theaters and all that stuff is like on a Friday and a Saturday. Boy, it used to get nuts down here. Now they'll close the street off down here on the weekend nights, and they'll still have events, but nothing like it used to be. Not at all close to what it used to be. Now, y'all remember the TV show In Plain Sight, Breaking Bad? Y'all remember that hotel that Mary would put her people up? There it is. Empty. Abandoned. That show was on 7 years ago. They still film Better Call Saul out here. But even some of the places that they like to highlight in that show have been boarded up and closed. That old building right there used to be full of people. It's now gone to hell. So we're driving around the city, and we're taking a look at what places that used to be nice places, used to be active places, used to be safe places, except for that ghetto up there. That's always been real rough. But the point of me showing you that ghetto was to show you how close it was to the baby killing mill, because that's the Margaret Sanger paradigm. And I wanted to talk to you about the people that live there and why that mill was there, close to them. But boomer politics, right? We already said that the greatest generation and the silent generation made it better for everybody. And not just with civil rights, but with the economy too. Because once they came back from the war, once they saw the racism of Hitler, once they saw that black people and Native American people could fight just as well as them, and actually black people and Native American people were literally the people that won the war for us, right? And once they saw the Great Depression, and once they saw all that they saw, they came back and they built a great country. And the problem was that they built it so well that their children had nothing to suffer, or very little to suffer. And they had their heads pumped full of this progressive poison from the leftists from the early 20th century that were still left over from the progressive era. So they thought they were going to have a cause, right? Let's think about this, right? I remember, now mind you, I went to Valley High School in the North Valley, about 3 miles here north of downtown, off of Candelaria. 12th and Candelaria. It's north of Interstate 40 here. And I remember kids. Yeah, we had the gangsters and stuff like down at West Mesa High and Rio Grande High and Albuquerque High and Highland High in the inner city schools. And we had some of them at my school too. We had quite a few of them, matter of fact. But there was a mixture of kids going to that school, and I remember kids going to school. Some of them had pickup trucks, and some of them, in the city even, had rifle racks in the back of their pickup truck, and would come to school with the rifle in the back of their pickup truck and park it there. And we didn't have school shootings. First major school shooting we had was what, Denver, 1999, that everybody knew about, out at Columbine. And it was one of these emo kids that was, okay. But, and then it was quiet for a while, and now we have a rash of them, right? Had a lot of that going on. That's the convention center. Not many conventions go on there anymore. It's a massive convention center. They do have some stuff here and there, but not like it used to be. You know, and it was still relatively safe. Now, the gangsters back then, yeah, we had like drive-by shootings and stuff. Oh, red light, pay attention, Aaron. You know, but even the gangsters would keep that out of school. And, you know, they'd like shoot up other gangsters' houses, and they would sell drugs on the streets, but it was on the corner. So there was even amongst the bad people, there was a code, right? And they went after each other, but they really didn't go after the innocents. You know, Michael Francis talks about this, even though he wasn't like a street thug or a street gangster, like the Mexican gangs or the black gangs or the Puerto Rican gangs or whatever, right? He said, you know, us and the mafia and even the other gangsters we dealt with, we kind of had a code where we went after each other, but we tried to leave the innocents alone. It was just kind of like a code that all of them had, right? He talks about that. But now that's gone. But see, with these progressive policies, we've let in people like MS-13 because we want to be nice on the border. I mean, forget the fact that we don't want to secure our border and make sure that the right people are coming in. This is boomer politics, y'all. This has been going on predominantly since the Clinton era. A lot of it. A lot of these businesses were just north of downtown, kind of in what they call the warehouse district. You know, it's kind of like a industrial district out here, and just a lot of these places are just closed. Some of it's been gentrified, like you got a little microbrewery in there, but there's no industrial, well, I shouldn't say there's a lot less of an industrial heart in this city. But the average home price here in Albuquerque is $400,000, don't you know? I mean, yeah, growing up as a kid, sometimes I would be beat up in my middle school if I wore the wrong color or something. But it was nothing like today. Even if they were dealing drugs on the corner of Central Avenue while we were out there cruising up and down, it was safe for us to do it. Relatively so. As long as you didn't start trouble, you didn't have trouble, you know. I was too busy showing off my 80s Pontiac with the stereo system in it to try and get girls. Or not 80s Pontiac with a nice stereo system in it. You know, see who had the most bass, right? Or who had the best sounding music. Or we'd go over to because, you know, I like country music too. We'd go over, they had a couple under 21 clubs, or clubs that, you know, if you only stayed till a certain time, they'd let everybody in, and they had country dance halls, and even the country nightclubs were kind of fun. And then we'd jump in the Pontiac with stereo system in it, throw our cowboy hats in the back seat, go over there and cruise central, and the Latin girls were out there, and the guys in the low riders. It was fun, man. It was a lot of fun. A lot of trouble that I got into, but I'm going to show you something here, because I can say this specifically about this city in Atlanta, Georgia, because these cities, we got the Rocky Mountains, right there. So, yeah, it's kind of like Atlanta meets Denver in a way. But the economies are are close enough, and what's happened to these cities is close enough. We can, it's pertinent to this discussion. But then you can push it out to other major cities in the country. But a lot of these manufacturing jobs, well, they're in China now. And the ones that are being reshored are being reshored to Mexico. And Mexico, as corrupt and as bad as it is, you can't get mad at Mexico because they're smart enough to take them. I know if I was in the Mexican government and somebody approached me and said, hey, we want to move our factories here to your country, I'd be, hey, hell yeah. Good for my economy. Put my people to work. So, yeah. Sad part is most of these are American companies. I remember a funny dude with orange hair who, while he was in office, had a big thing about trying to repatriate a lot of these American companies back into these cities so that way his constituents could go to work and make a future for themselves and their families. Guy with orange hair that everybody likes to hate on and thinks is crazy, right? Oh yeah, he's a billionaire, he's a rich guy. He's one of the 1%, but I think he's one of the good ones, right? I think there was a reason why he wanted to do that. Maybe he was thinking about Atlanta and Albuquerque. Maybe he was thinking about Memphis and New York City and Detroit and Chicago. Maybe he was thinking about San Francisco, even though California is a communist state, Maybe he was thinking about those people. Now, Albuquerque is is in a Hispanic region of the country. And a predominant share of the minority people in this city are of Hispanic extraction. But this is a minority city. Less than 40% of the people that live in this city are white people. The rest of them are black people, Hispanic, and Native American. The largest portion being Hispanic. The next largest portion being black people. And then after that it's Native Americans, and then there's some Asians and some Jewish people and some other Middle Eastern people and others thrown into that mix. But yeah, this is a minority city. And this is also, with the exception of the high-speed engineers that work up at the Air Force Base and at Sandia Labs, are in defense tech and the tech industry. The majority of the people in this town are not college educated, high school educated. but they're blue-collar people. Between Bernally, or between Algodones, which is the furthest north town, to Bernardo, which is the furthest south town in this valley, and between Moriarty and 9 Mile Hill are 1.5 million people. The city itself has just under 600,000. So there's 1.5 million people in this metropolitan area, most of which are blue-collar people. Most of which are non-white people. Most of which, up until 30 years ago, were actually doing pretty well for themselves. In this city, because of that demographic, until everything fell out, was an exciting, beautiful, wonderful place to live. You had a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. This is a place like the El Rey Theater on Central downtown. I didn't show it to you, but we went past it. You know, that's where a lot of R&B acts would come when they were first starting out. You know, it's kind of like the Apollo or something like that. Or a lot of, you know, Hispanic, like cumbia, ranchero acts would come. A lot of country music acts would, you know, make their little debut on their little circuits, you know, before they made it big. And you go down, and even some bigger acts like that came here like years before, right? And they wanted to, like, you know, maybe stop in and do an off show or whatever, would drop into these places, and you get FaceTime with these people, right? And that place is still there, and they still do a little bit of that, but boy, that was a big thing back then. You know, or you could go out on the river, out in the, what they would call the Bosque, which is a heavily wooded state park that runs the length of the river through town. And you could even go and do stuff like, you know, just hang out there during the day and relax. Or, you know, go out there at night with your friends. If you couldn't find something else to do in the city. Now you go out there in the woods in the middle of the night, wrong time, and you're liable to have something happen to you. But remember, the median home price here in this city is $400,000. 6 hours to the north in Denver, it's just over $500,000. 4 hours to the south in the El Paso, Las Cruces Metroplex, which we are going to go see in the next few weeks, if I get my way. It's about where it is here now. That's on a border town. They got all kinds of problems down there. A good portion of that city looks like Sanford and Son's backyard. And you know, from the time of Clinton through Obama, it was really sliding downhill, and we got a little bit of a break. I know, from that orange guy that everybody hates. But now it's like after the orange guy, it's pedal to the metal. But these Democrats mean well. They care about you Americans. especially you black people and you Hispanic people and you Native American people, they love you. Oh, did I mention that Johnson and Margaret Sanger were Democrats? Yeah, those people that wanted to kill you. I heard on the news this morning something very interesting. And actually, it wasn't on the news. It was from Todd Sachs on his real estate show. Angerman, I encourage you to check him out. He's got a lot of good information, bro. I know you like to follow stuff like that and finance and real estate because you're a smart man. But he said something very interesting to me. Or not to me, but he said it to me because he was saying it to his audience and I was part of his audience. But he said something very interesting. He said that after these investment companies off of Wall Street have taken an oligarchy on overbidding and buying out large sections or large chunks of single-family housing, which is part of what's causing a glut in the housing market. There's some other pieces of that too, which we'll cover. And then they went after single-family or multifamily, and they've pretty much put the mom and pop landlord out of business. Remember all those multi-unit mom and pop places we showed you early in the video that I told you I used to work at? Yeah, most of those places are owned by corporate investors now. They used to be owned by mom and pop places, and mom and pop would live in the back unit and they'd have 2 or 3 tenants in that building and they'd take care of it. I know because I worked for one of them. That's gone. So now, he was telling us, he said now, they're starting to take over mobile home parks. So that was kind of like the last, or one of the last vestiges for somebody who wasn't in the ghetto, and they were kind of like right on the edge of maybe the top side of the lower class, or right on, like right at the bottom of the middle class. Maybe they were looking to move up, or maybe that's just what they could afford, or where they could settle. Or like you have these, a lot of these mobile home parks are retirement communities where you have retired people who they're not like wealthy upper middle class retired people. They're on a fixed income, maybe somewhere, like at the bottom of that middle class or top of the lower class. And they had these, retirement mobile home parks or whatever. And they were decent and they were quiet and they could still live out a reasonable existence in that and still have their own dwelling. Well, now he was saying that a lot of these corporate entities are buying out mobile home parks now too. So a lot of these mobile home parks, you either rent the trailer or you buy the trailer, but you rent the land that it sits on. And you're either on their utilities or city utilities, depending on where the park is, or county utilities, right? Well, now that these corporate entities are buying out these mobile home parks, they're probably going to do just like they did with single-family housing, multifamily housing, and what they did when they pushed the mom and pops out of the market, right? And everybody's going to go, well, that's the case for rent control. No, it's not, okay? Because all rent control does is it makes it more expensive for people to do business, and it prohibits people from either converting existing facilities into housing or from constructing newer affordable housing, such as a starter home or multifamily housing or mobile home parks. So rent control is not the answer. And I listened to what he was saying, and I was like, wait a minute. There's actually 2 laws that were passed by Republicans that deal with this. And it was initially passed because of what was going on in the Gilded Age and the early Progressive Age with elites who were trying to corner or monopolize certain markets, and the hell with the other guy, right? Push the little guy out, kill their competition. It's called the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Clayton Antitrust Act. So these laws are already on the books, and I actually went through and I read some of it. And the purpose of these laws was not to kill business, but what it was intended to do was to prevent interests from becoming, and this is what it says in the law, monopolies or cartels, what we would call an oligarchy, to stifle competition and to prevent people from taking advantage of, undue and unfair, illicit advantage of consumers. Home buyers and renters are consumers. Mom and pop landlords are competing business interests. So you mean to tell me that these people are next? You know, I remember an orange man talking about stuff like this while he was around. Even though he himself was a big businessman, and he was not above buying out his competitors. But I do remember him, doing several hearings before he was a politician as a businessman, talking about antitrust and why, even for a guy as big as him, things like rent control and preventing oligarchies and monopolies were actually the best things for even big people like him, and they were fairer towards his consumers, the people he leased to, the businesses he did business with, the people who went to his casinos and rented from his hotels. Yeah, even he was talking about stuff like that. So that shit's illegal, but they're not enforcing that. It's illegal as fuck. If you don't believe me, go watch Sax Realty. He's on YouTube. He does 2 or 3 shows a week. I remember when Glenn Beck was at Fox News. And he talked about the progressives like George Bernard Shaw and Margaret Sanger and Woodrow Wilson and all the things that they used to talk about back in the day, right? All the things that they dreamed would happen in the world. So now we're going to not only try to talk them into killing themselves and poison their culture But now we're going to also make it difficult for companies to stay here in this country and offer opportunities for these people to get a livelihood. We're also going to make it almost impossible for them to obtain any sort of real property. Or if they can't do that, we're going to make it very difficult for them to be a tenant. Let's talk about zoning laws. Now, most of the single-family housing built in this country, in these large cities, even on the East Coast, even though a lot of those houses out there are older homes, the lion's share of that was built after World War II, from about the 1940s up into the 1990s. And yes, a lot of it was built in the early 2000s, and some of it is even still being built today. But the suburbanite or the single-family home tract housing, a lot of the stuff that we see in multifamily housing today, that was from that time, okay? Well, we're two generations, silent generation people, okay? And zoning laws they weren't always environmentally friendly, and perhaps there should have been a little bit more towards environmental easement. That does make some sense. You don't want to, completely do away with, some green spaces and natural settings. Okay, I got that. I get it. I understand. But they were not as restrictive at the time. So these builders, these developers, it was not very difficult for them. They didn't incur a whole lot of legal overhead just to put a shovel in the ground. So they were able to build this out. Well, I remember it started in the late 60s, mostly in the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. And there's always a lag time on this. All these fucking boomer hippies, right? Oh, we want this green space, and we want to preserve this space, and we don't want this here and that here, and this restriction and that restriction, and but see, what happened is now we have Generation X. Even though it's a small generation, it's 66 million people. And even now, not even all of us have our own homes. And even when we were trying to, it was a lot more difficult for us than it was for our parents. And the millennials are almost as big as the baby boomer generation was. Well, they're in their 30s and 40s, and they want to have houses and families too. But we can't put a house here because of this snail darter. And we can't put an apartment complex here because there's this tree or something. Or we want this green space. Or here's one that's real fucking popular with boomers. Not in my backyard. So I'm going to wrap this up in a little bit, but I'm actually going to take you down a freeway here in Albuquerque that it took them 30 years to build. Why did it take them 30 years to build? Because a portion of it passes through and actually makes a crossing across the river adjacent to where a lot of very wealthy yuppies live. And they just didn't want to share. Now, I'm not one of these guys that believes that the government, like they did in Phoenix, on the south side of Phoenix, where they abused eminent domain and pushed a lot of lower class people out of their homes in that part of the city. No, I'm not for that at all. Okay, to put Interstate 10 and Interstate 17 through, no. If an eminent domain is when the government says, hey, we need this to make a road or to put a power line in or whatever. But when they do that, they're supposed to pay you a fair market price. Okay, and you still have the right to say no, but some of it was state land, some of it was private land that they had to get through eminent domain. And they did do it fairly. But my God, man. Not in my backyard. Meanwhile, the fastest growing portion of the city at the time was on the other side of the river. And there's hundreds of thousands of people that have to get to work. Well, the same is going on in this part of town regards putting in multifamily housing. So that was a state project because that's a state highway, right? So, okay, yeah, we get that. But that whole not in my backyard mentality started to play out. And even then, they fought over this freeway from the late 1960s all the way until they got the interchange completed at New Mexico 423 and I-25 in 2002. 40 fucking years. And there's 500,000 people on that side of the river that need to get to work. Okay? But here's another one. I'm fixing to go past this place. So there was a guy or a company that bought a piece of land here. And they're finally getting them built now. Private property owner. And so the section of town that this is in, it took them 10 years before they could get it finally zoned for multifamily housing. And in this region of town, there's certain building codes, so they can only build it so tall. It has to look a certain way. I mean, it was just fucking ridiculous. How much do you think it cost this developer, once all that was said and done, before he even put a shovel in the ground? They're just now getting it built up here. This was a project that I actually delivered to last year. And these are nice houses next to this. This is actually a wealthier area of town. But not in my backyard. Never mind that this is a private piece of property and that we're supposed to have property rights in this country. Never mind the fact that had this developer not incurred as much cost as he did and had as much time wasted as he did just to put those buildings up that aren't even finished yet. That maybe he was going to, through his capitalism, make it available, make more housing available to consumers so that maybe prices could be a little bit more competitive because there was a little bit more supply to help with the demand, right? No, these fucking boomers don't think about that. They just don't want that in their backyard. What the fuck? I'm gonna take you down the freeway that took them 40 years to build. Here's the stupid part about it. I'm on one of the major roads right now that actually crosses over this freeway. This freeway from Interstate 25 to Coors Road crosses, let's see, there's an exit at Jefferson, it crosses Edith, there's an exit at 2nd Street, it goes under 4th Street, it goes under Rio Grande Boulevard, then it shoots about 2 miles, and then it goes over Coors, and then it meets a stoplight at Eagle Ranch Road, and then it turns back into Surface Street. So that's what, 7 possible exits. They only have 3. And no truck traffic. So a truck driver who's trying to get across this river cannot use this freeway. There's not another major highway for him to use 7 miles that way to the south, 11 miles to the north. He can use one other surface street that's full of stoplights. Or he can go all the way down, or he can go all the way up to Bernalillo and use US 550. Or all the way down to Interstate 40 or Central Avenue. As a truck driver, to get to anywhere on the northwest side of the metropolitan area, even though it's 12 miles away, it takes me 45 minutes. How much commerce is that hindering? But not in my fucking backyard. Right? They got theirs, but they don't want to share with others. You know, it's that whole progressive mindset. It infected almost an entire generation. Barring the guys that went to Vietnam. Those guys, they're more towards us. But even some of them are starting to drink a lot of that fucking Kool-Aid. And the answer's not socialism. It's quite the opposite. We've had micro-socialism for 70 years in this country. Actually, no, 50 years. 55 years. It's about 1965. And it's broken our backs. We've had reprieves like the Reagan years, a few of the Bush years, and the Donald Trump years. That's the only breaks we've had. And they were good breaks too. But as Nick Freitas and his co-host would say, the Leviathan has been constantly going to the left. And now we have cities like Albuquerque. And it's propagated by a class of people who are trying to squeeze out, kill off those that they don't want to share this world with. You listening to me, black people? So are you glad Hispanic people and black people and Native American people that Lyndon Johnson has had you voting Democrat for 200 years? Are you glad about that? Are you glad that these progressive boomers have been either corporately or through politics, local, state, federal, have been enacting these micro-socialist policies that hurt you, all while telling you that they love you. You glad about that? What do you got to say, Atlanta, Memphis, Chicago, Albuquerque, St. Louis, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, New York? Y'all had a break with Giuliani. You glad about that? You happy about that? Do you enjoy that? Does that make you happy and swell? Huh? We ain't even gone into immigration yet. And I'm going to save that for my trip to El Paso, Las Cruces. Well, I'm going to tell you that to the Democrats, most of them, maybe a few exceptions like Joe Manchin, but to almost all of the Democrats, even the ones of color, Deb Haaland, Native American, here from New Mexico, who won't let Native Americans drill on their own fucking land or mine their own goddamn land, but you're a Native American politician, you're their friend. Fuck you. Those people want fucking jobs. Those people want an economy. They want a fucking future for their kids. Get off their fucking backs. Black people. Elon Omar. The fuck is wrong with you? Those are your fucking people. You don't love them. Marcus Aurelius fucking wrote a poem about the traitor. How he speaks in your voice, moves within your gates. You know, we need to start listening to the Yvette Harrells and the Larry Elders of the world. This is fucking... I'm on this freeway now. This freeway took 40 fucking years to build. I just crossed that bridge. Look at this. Not in my backyard. Fuck you. The rest of us have got to live. Most of us would like to enter the market too. Let them have a chance and leave us the fuck alone. We want freedom too. You get yours and you change the zoning codes so that way you can slam the door on the rest of us. And then you call that capitalism. That's not fucking capitalism. That's fucking fascism. That's communism. Capitalism is letting every single man have a fair shot. And then once he gets his piece, leave him alone unless he's doing something to you directly. Quit pulling the men out of these people's houses and allow them the opportunity to make a family and to earn their keep just like the rest of us. To build themselves a culture. My generation is fucking sick of it. And we're not afraid to call the crap for what it is. Because we fucking see it. We grew up in a time where we understood every single man was a man. And we didn't give a fuck as long as you allowed us to do what we needed to do and left us alone. But we're real good at fucking seeing bullshit for what it is. And I pray to God these next couple of election cycles, with the help of Mr. Orange, I think he gets it too, that some of you old fuckers die off or just go away, and let some of us who actually have 2 fucking brain cells in our head get up in a fucking seat and unfuck this. Because we actually want the people behind us to have an opportunity to live a free, healthy life where they can go out there, get theirs, just like everybody else. We don't care what color they are. We don't care where the fuck they come from, as long as they're not breaking the law, as long as they're not fucking hurting other people. Just leave us alone. All of us. Let us go and make our money and get our property. And then once we get it, don't tell us what we can and can't do with it. And don't tell us that we can't conduct our business in your backyard unless we're committing crimes. Fuck you. And fuck you people who say, oh, it's a woman's right to kill her baby. The fuck it is. And you got these goddamn women believing that that's the free and right thing to do. There's one demographic in this country, black people, that if that hadn't been happening, there'd be twice as many of them alive today. If you hadn't put in the fucking stipulation that they had to remove the man out of the house for them to get just a little bit of help so that they can get back on their fucking feet again, maybe their fucking families would be intact. But no, you hate them so fucking much that you're going to put policies in place that'll cause them to destroy themselves. Fuck you. Enough. I spent almost 2 decades of my life serving this country and put a uniform on to protect that Constitution. And that Constitution was written for all of us. Every single one of us. And I went to war for 5 fucking years to fight for that. And you motherfuckers are taking it away from me and everybody else. Fuck you. All I want is to go to work, have a house, have a family, make my money, maybe start a business, maybe become a big, I don't know. But I just want to be left the hell alone. And so does everybody else. And I want everybody to have that chance. This is Aaron Purdue, signing out.